Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar in the series WDI USA is doing on living the Declaration on women's sex-based rights. We're very happy to be here this evening, and we're waiting for attendees to fill up. We are recording this session, and we will get started in just a few minutes. We'll just wait another minute or so for attendees to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Dansky, and I'm the president of the US chapter of Women's Declaration International. And I'm very happy to be here tonight to host this discussion about Article 3 of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which centers around reproductive integrity. The timing of this conversation could not be more crucial given the excruciating decision that came out of the Supreme Court last Friday, overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. We'll get into some of the details about that. The purpose of this series is really to bring the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights to life in our lives as women who need to have our sex-based rights if we are to be able to participate freely and fairly in society. And our right to do that was severely curtailed on Friday. And what we really want to do here is make the Declaration personal to us in our lives. So to do that, I will get us started tonight by telling the story of a woman who cannot be here with us because she passed away in December. And then we'll move to Lauren Levey, WDI Vice President, who is going to tell her personal recollection of life before Roe. And then we'll hear from Iris Erlings, who's going to tell us some of her personal experiences of coming to the United States and what reproductive rights looked like for her as a young woman. So the woman I want to talk about to start is a woman named Sarah Weddington. And I never knew her personally. I read her 1992 book, A Question of Choice, in 1992 when it came out. Sarah was born in rural Texas in the 1940s or 50s. And in 1967, she went to the University of Texas Law School. She was one of, I think, 20 women in a class of several hundred men. And while she was in law school, she entered into an intimate relationship with the man who would become her husband. His name was Ron Weddington, and eventually needed an abortion. And in 1967, it was not possible for her to get an abortion in the state of Texas. So she and her fiance, Ron, traveled to Mexico, where she was able to obtain a safe abortion. And she survived, and that's wonderful. So she graduated from law school. She had a terrible time getting jobs as a woman at that time in the late 1960s, but she did eventually find employment. And the other thing she did was work with several of her friends in an underground network whose purpose it was to raise money to help women find legal abortions, sometimes to cross state lines to find legal abortions, other times to obtain illegal but still safe abortions. And this network of women raised money, they organized, and they helped women find abortions in the state of Texas in the late 1960s and very early 70s. And at one point they decided it was time to sue the state of Texas over its abortion restriction. And it's worth noting that the abortion restriction that was in place in Texas at that time is the one that just kicked in on Friday when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. So they found a plaintiff, a woman who was willing to sue, who went by Jane Roe. And what is truly extraordinary to me is that at the age of 25, Sarah Weddington filed her very first federal court case, which was Roe v. Wade, in the Eastern District of Texas in federal court. And it made its way to the Supreme Court. And in 1972, at the age of 27, she engaged in her very first, and to the best of my knowledge, only oral argument before the United States Supreme Court. She faced 9 men, and she argued on behalf of the right of women and girls to obtain safe and legal abortion, and she won. And we can have a conversation about whether Roe v. Wade rested on the strongest legal ground, whether there might have been other approaches that the legal team might have taken. But regardless of what anyone thinks about that, the bottom line is that Roe v. Wade was a massive victory for women and girls, and we have Sarah Weddington to thank for that. She left us in December of last year. So I just want to pay that tribute to Sarah Weddington and thank her for the work that she did in establishing this massive legal precedent that changed the lives of women and girls. So with that, I would like to turn to WDI USA Vice President Lauren Levey. Lauren, are you here?
Yes, it's all working.
Great.
Thank you, Kara. So Article 3, Section A of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights reads as follows. States should ensure that the full reproductive rights of women and girls and unhindered access to comprehensive reproductive services are upheld. As the Vice President of WDI USA, I can state with confidence that Article 3 includes the right to abortion on demand without apology for any reason or no reason for all women and girls. Roe v. Wade was the 1973 landmark Supreme Court case that gave women the right to choose to abort an unwanted fetus. Most women now living have no personal memory of what it was like to live in the United States as a woman of childbearing age prior to the ruling in Roe. But I do have that memory, and last December I had the opportunity to talk about it personally with Jennifer Mernan in an interview for Green Flame. I talked about what the universal abortion ban felt like, how it affected the lives of women and girls, and how I think it fit structurally into the larger cultural fabric of the times. What I'll talk about here includes some of that conversation. So the nightmare that was the 1950s American culture began in the late 1940s after World War II with the return home of the GIs and the resulting baby boom. It ended quite suddenly and explosively in the early to mid 1960s. That 1950s American culture coincided precisely with my entire childhood. For girls and women, 1950s culture presented daunting obstacles. Those obstacles worked together synergistically to produce universal female misery that was apparent whenever the masks slipped and you caught a glimpse behind the forced cheerfulness, fake naivete, and fashionable pastel color palette of the era. Here's a list of the cultural obstacles for all women and girls in 1950s culture. First, abortion was illegal. Second, virginity ideology for girls only was the norm. Third, birth control devices were generally not available to single young women. Fourth, marriage laws were draconian for women, but you only found out how harsh they were when you divorced, because as a little girl, you didn't really know any divorced women. They were generally excluded from family gatherings because divorced women represented a shameful taboo, a failure, and a tragedy that was inconsistent with the culture's prevailing forced cheerfulness. The social ostracism of divorced women, but not men, supported the lie peddled to little girls that marriages were fairy tales. In reality, you lost rights the moment you married, and you not only didn't get them back when you divorced, you were punished and shunned in addition. Fifth, discrimination against women in employment was not only lawful, but was generally considered reasonable for reasons I'll get to shortly. Sixth, lesbians were criminals, but also didn't really exist, but also were invisible just in case they existed. Seventh, if you were a little girl, pretty much everything you were taught about how the culture worked was a lie. You were groomed with lies to ensure that you would fail at independent life. And as a little girl who read a lot, I sort of guessed it was all a lie, but I also knew I had absolutely no idea of what was actually true. So virginity ideology meant that substantial social stigma and financial hardship would result from giving birth to a child while you were unmarried. There were girls in high school with me who were expelled from school simply for becoming pregnant. Something about avoiding the possibility that other girls could be corrupted is what I was told. But young fathers were not expelled, right? I was horrified on behalf of those girls. For me, education and career constituted the only path I could see to achieving control over my life. But pregnancy would permanently disrupt a girl's education and derail all her future life choices even before high school graduation. Under those cultural and legal circumstances, employers would reasonably hesitate to hire or promote any woman if they had an alternative. After all, women could, without warning, have their lives and careers disrupted by unplanned pregnancy. This made women inherently unreliable employees. Now, I had a strong suspicion from an early age that I was a lesbian, so I figured I was unlikely to experience a badly timed pregnancy. But even so, I was as affected by the cultural presumptions as heterosexual girls and women. This is because lesbianism was paradoxically stigmatized, criminalized, and also made invisible and even fictional. The message seemed to be that lesbians didn't exist any more than Tinkerbell did, but just in case they did, they could be shunned and jailed. There was an overwhelming presumption of heterosexuality. But, explaining to an employer that he didn't need to worry about my having a career-disrupting pregnancy because I was a lesbian would not have enhanced my employment prospects. It became clear to me pretty early that having free access to both birth control and abortion would be in the interest of every woman, lesbian or not, who wants even moderate control over her own plans for her own life. In 1965, I entered Bennington College, which at the time was a tiny, very liberal, all-women's college. And just like that, to my amazement and delight, the 1950s were suddenly and completely over as though a switch had been thrown. And I, this alienated, puzzled, angry kid, had suddenly found my tribe. All women my age, all angry, and no men. We were enraged by the prevailing culture of lies and corruption and war and injustice, and we were determined to address all of it without delay. We were so very done with the 1950s, and suddenly now we, the leading edge of the irresistible post-war baby boom tidal wave, had come of age. We were finally old enough to organize in opposition to the post-World War II propaganda culture that had aimed to reward every veteran with his very own female slave. After all, our boys deserved a personal slave, and women owed it to them. They just fought for and won a free world. Okay, maybe not so free, maybe just a safer world. Well, okay, thinking of atomic bombs and Cold War, maybe not so safe either. But they had stopped Hitler, and so we owed them all a house, a job, and a woman. In college, when one of my fellow students became pregnant, she might risk asking her parents for help, but the risk was that her parents might pull her out of school, and even so might still not help her get an abortion. Her autonomy for the rest of her life could realistically be on the line, so we passed the hat. There was a nearby OBGYN, a woman who would perform an illegal but medically safe abortion for $1,200. That's $1,200 in 1965 currency. It seemed fair because the young doctor, if discovered, stood to lose her livelihood or even her liberty. She could go to prison. We would pass the hat again and again until we had enough. I'm not aware of any student who needed an abortion who didn't get one while I was at Bennington, because sisterhood is powerful. Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. It ruled that a woman's right to abort existed and that it diminished over the course of her pregnancy. My thoughts about the ruling were complicated. On one hand, it was a great relief. Abortion would be legal and accessible everywhere in the United States. On the other hand, some of us also felt angry and disappointed that the all-male Supreme Court had denied a woman's right to absolute sovereignty over the interior of her own body. We felt strongly that the moment of birth, that is the moment of emerging from the mother's body, is the natural and obvious time to give a person human rights, and not one moment before. How does it make sense that a stranger wearing a judicial robe or a pastor's robe has more interest in a fetus than the woman whose body protects it, the mother whose DNA it shares? So Roe seemed like a bad compromise and an insult to women's humanity, but still a great relief. Immediately after Roe, abortion-related deaths dramatically plummeted. Not surprisingly, most of the prior preventable deaths were deaths of poor women and women of color. In the 1950s and 60s, as today, women needed agency and control over their lives as much as they needed air and water. As safe abortion once again becomes unavailable, unsafe abortions will occur. It is inevitable because women will risk our lives for liberty and agency. And once again, the women who will die will disproportionately be poor women and women of color. This is not debatable, and it's also not a secret. After World War II, women who had worked in men's jobs during the war were forced out of public life and back into the home. My own mother was one of them. She was sexually harassed out of the job she had held with the United States Army for more than a decade. It's not hard to see that there's currently a global trend toward once again forcing women out of independent public life and back into the home. It can be seen in the lie of gender identity, a device used to silence all discussion of women as a historically disadvantaged sex class that includes men. It can be seen in the removal of public restrooms just for women. It can be seen in the campaign to re-stigmatize lesbians, in the increased violence and subjugation of women by men in mundane imagery, saturating everything from fashion to advertising to porn, and of course, in the removal of women's legal right to abortion. The women's liberation movement of the late 1960s and early 1970s was built using two crucial tools. First, women meeting in women-only spaces and organizing as the political class called women. And second, greatly increased options for controlling our own reproduction. It is no accident that both of these rights are now being taken away, one by the left, the other by the right. Once again, women are going to die as a result because women, like all people, will risk our lives for bodily autonomy. And once again, the burden will fall disproportionately on poor women and women of color. The terrible ghosts of the 1950s have been summoned back. What we've got going for us is that we understand 1950s culture now. It's no longer a mystery, and we know that half a century ago, we succeeded, at least for a while, in bringing it down and building a new culture through our rage and our sisterhood and our movement for women's liberation. So we're smarter than we were. But the current version of patriarchy is smarter too, and also angrier. Women will need to respond accordingly with more intelligence and courage than ever, and with the clear understanding that we have almost nothing left to lose. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. That's such an important series of reminders of our history and what we're up against and what we're fighting and what we will continue to fight. I know it's not the point of this webinar, but I do just want to say, following up on what Lauren said, WDI USA could not be more excited about our fall convention in September in DC. to talk about all of these things, to talk about reigniting the women's liberation movement. We're going to do this. We are going to power through, and we're going to get through, and we're going to learn from the mistakes that we've made, and from not even mistakes, just from what we've learned over the past 50 years or so. So I wanted to just share a very brief story before moving on to Iris, which is, so I myself have not ever needed an abortion. I'm grateful that if I had, I would have had the ability to obtain one. But I have no shortage in my life of women who have had abortions. And one of them is my aunt, my mother's youngest sister, had an abortion. She was old enough at the time that it would have been legal. And, but nonetheless, she had it when she was a teenager. And that so greatly offended her parents, my grandparents, that they kicked her out of the house. And she had a very difficult time. And she ended up in a not great friend group. And she ended up engaged to and then marrying the man who would later go on to murder her when she was 25 years old. The direness of the situation cannot be overstated. So thank you to all the women who are here. And now I want to turn to Iris, and I just want to say we are having a little bit of some technical difficulties, which is to say that Zoom is not letting Iris turn on her video, and I'm doing my best to make Iris a co-host. And Iris, you are now a co-host, and you should be able to turn on your video if you would like to.
Okay, let's see.
Of course, if you don't want to or can't, that's fine. Okay, your video is on, but you're very dark. Okay.
There.
It's wonderful to have you here, Iris. Please share a little bit about your story of immigrating to the States and whatever you'd like to share from your personal experience of reproductive rights in the States.
Yes, I'm so disappointed here with the camera, but I will just do this.
Beautiful.
Anyway, I moved to the United States in 1994. Well, I came here to get my degree in journalism, and went back and forth between Iceland and the United States in the 90s, and then I got my green card in 1996, and I got my citizenship last year. I was looking forward to vote for the first time for you know who, but you know who not. I was 18 years old when I got pregnant, and I was absolutely devastated. I was getting ready to go to law school, and I was 2 years ahead of my peers, so this was just extremely exciting for me. And abortion was legal in Iceland, not on demand. Abortion became legal in 1975, and but my mother was the director of the Cancer Society of Reykjavik, and so she knew a lot of OBGYNs. So I didn't have to, I didn't have to make up that there was something wrong with me or was something wrong with the fetus. So, with it, this is a lot of things in Iceland happen like this. Someone, and thus can get what you want. And abortion on demand didn't become legal in Iceland until in 2019. And then, and it is legal until the end of the 22nd week. Well, we hear so often, well, here in the United States, well, the debate about abortion in Scandinavia, or Iceland, at least, and the United States, it's so different. And first of all, the language is just so annoying. To be pro-life indicates that you're either pro-life or you're anti-life, which couldn't be, it's just ridiculous. I don't know any woman. I mean, I know a few women, a few of my friends have had abortions, and it's very difficult. It's an emotional. It's just really hard. But it was for me, and I don't know any woman for whom it has not been a very difficult. Well, difficult, maybe not decision. I mean, I knew that I couldn't have a baby. I was 18 years old. I didn't have a job. My boyfriend didn't have a job. It just, I just, this couldn't happen to me personally. But it was still, it wasn't like, it wasn't like having my nails done or something, which is like the discussion here in the States is that if you are pro-choice, that women are some sort of monsters, that you just kind of that you have there's a choice between abortion and contraception. It's just ridiculous. And I don't know. I've never understood how the debate has developed like that, because it's not like that at all in Scandinavia. So anyway, I had the procedure. I remember this very well. I had the procedure, and it was. I was very happy that I didn't have to have this child. I was also sad, because, like I said, for me, it was. I'm not a religious person. I didn't feel like I was doing anything wrong, but still, it was not easy, and I think it's insulting to maintain that women have abortions just like having their hair done or something. And what the future will hold, I mean, I'm not that familiar with the law here in the United States. Now I know that, like Kara said, that and I've read your articles about this, that that now that the decisions about this will go to the states, and we know how that will be divided. There will be red and blue, and but we all know, whether we're religious or not, that abortions will happen. And maybe the generation like of my daughter, she's 19, she's 20, excuse me. They don't realize, they don't know what it is. They haven't heard about the what is it called? About the clothes hanger abortions, which is what they were called in Iceland. But you know, women my age, my generation, we've all heard about that, and women died. You know, I heard about that when I was a teenager. So for my generation, women of my generation, this is very real, the consequences, and the consequences of so much of what we are losing, you know, abortion, our rights to this trans trans people, this generation, they've always had what, you know, when you have always had something, you don't know what it is. They don't know what they're losing. They don't know what it is not to have free speech. They don't know what it is to have all the rights that they have. And it's really, it's terrible that another generation will have to learn the hard way. You know, their friends will have to die or end up in a horrible position because they couldn't get a legal abortion. Yeah, I'm grateful that I was able to get that. I'm grateful for the excellent healthcare system we had in Iceland and still do over there. And I wish for that to, I hope that continues in Iceland. Although I must say that, and I hope I won't be kicked out of the PDI for saying this. In Denmark, women can have abortion until the end of the 12th week. In Sweden until the end of the 18th week, and in Iceland until the end of the 22nd week. And I know that to a lot of people it is that the thought of that is just horrible. To me, it's, well, it doesn't matter what I think, but I've been reminded of what I read in an article by you, Kara, about the importance of being able to compromise. When you spent time in DC, or when you were working there, you learned that the importance of compromise, and I've been thinking about that. Of course, as you get older too, you learn, you kind of understand the importance of you know, not just demanding.
So I'm going to jump in, Iris, if that's okay. I know the exact article that you're talking about compromise. And I think, Iris, I think you're raising some really good questions about, basically you're talking about terms, and at what point in a pregnancy should a woman should limitations on a woman's ability to abort be permissible? That's the question you're raising, right? In raising
Right.
between the Scandinavian countries. I think it's a really good question, and you're not going to get kicked out of WDI for asking the question. And it gets into a lot of things. I want to move on a little bit so that we have time for questions and discussion. There's a really important question for Lauren in the Q&A, and I want Lauren, have you been able to look at it, or do you want me to read it?
I have been able to, but maybe it would be helpful for you to read it so that everybody can hear it.
Okay, good point. So the question to Lauren, oh no, now I can't see it. Okay, hold on. The question to Lauren, when did you start to see the results of Roe or other protections that gave women more agency?
Okay, so the answer is complicated. The simple answer is instantly. It was instant, but it's not clear that it was. See, abortion, the right to an abortion was a result. It was a product. It was one of many products of the women's liberation movement. It wouldn't have happened without the women's liberation changing the culture first. It just wouldn't. And the results of women's liberation, of the women's liberation movement happened, as I said, like throwing a switch. Suddenly, abortion was, you could have an abortion, and people were acting differently because of it, but also they were acting differently, and that created a climate in which you could have abortion. But because of abortion, I think, so these things were related the way the obstacles were related, as I described before. The liberties were related to. So we got some laws that outlawed employment discrimination, for instance, because it became rational then. Once there was abortion, it became rational not to discriminate on the basis of sex. There was no reason for it. There's no functional reason for it that was able to be defended. Lesbians, oh my goodness, everybody wanted to be a lesbian. Lesbians became fashionable, which was like it had, it's a double-edged sword, but there it was. It flipped from one extreme to the other. Suddenly lesbians were everywhere, and we were in the streets, and we were on the covers of Vogue magazine and whatever. And there was this sexual revolution, which wasn't part of the women's liberation movement, but the women's liberation movement occurred in that context. So, the virginity cult was gone. It was just gone. And even marriage, marriage is a problematic, corrupt institution. I mean, it remains so, in my opinion, but marriage certainly changed dramatically as a result of the women's liberation movement and as a result of the availability of abortion. And also, I must say that part of this movement was that lying itself became really unfashionable.
Thanks, Lauren. I also just want to say, Iris, if you haven't seen it, there is so much love and support going on in the chat, and so much gratitude to you for sharing your story about abortion. I'll just say, one of my closest friends, I know she was probably 21, maybe 22, and she made some decisions she regretted, and she ended up pregnant, and she made that choice. Her mother completely supported her in that choice and accompanied her to the clinic. And in the intervening 20 to 30 years, my friend has expressed that, yes, she carries sadness about it, but she does not carry any regret. And I'm sure that for every woman who goes through that, it's a different emotional experience depending on circumstances and depending on personal circumstances. But really, Iris, just there's a lot of love and support and gratitude to you for talking about this. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, I would like to add, I had so much support from my mother, who had 7 children. 2 of them had died just because healthcare was so terrible. My mother is 83 now, and 4 of us, and well, actually my brother died last year, but 4 of us, 5, well then 6, 7, almost all of us siblings have it's called a rhesus. It's a rhesus negative blood. It's the fetus doesn't have the same blood as the mother, so the mother's body treats it as an enemy. And my mother lost 2 fully, they were just they died because of this. She also, had, my parents had us 5 kids and didn't have very much, and it was so important. This was so important to my mother that I be able to get this opportunity and go to law school and study and get the opportunity that she didn't have. And I'll never forget that. And that was so, her support. That was so important, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll also just share briefly on the topic of my aunt. It was my mother who convinced me when I was a teenager and fighting for abortion rights. I raised the question with my mom. I asked her, do you think that teenage girls should be required to have parental consent before aborting? And my mother, I was a teenage girl, and my mother said, no, I don't. And it was her baby sister's experience that informed that. My own mother was willing for me to have the right to abort if I needed it without her knowledge or consent, because her baby sister had had an abortion against her parents' wishes and gotten kicked out of the house with disastrous life consequences because of it. So I'm grateful to all of our mothers who will support their daughters and their sisters and their granddaughters in the right to pursue our lives as full participating members of society. We have about 15 more minutes. I want to invite as many questions as possible in the Q&A, or as many questions as there are interest for. There are no questions right now. I want to say that if women would like, I can say some things about the Dobbs decision, but this discussion has been so personal and so touching, I'm a little reluctant to get into the ins and outs of the legal opinion, but I will do that if women would find that to be helpful. I'm happy to hear input in the chat or in the Q&A about where women want to go with this conversation for the next 15 minutes.
I have a question. I have read your, I subscribe to your Substack, so I read everything there. What I am curious about your opinion, because I've been reading very different opinions about what this means for Democrats. I had COVID a few months ago, and I have COVID fog. I can't remember anything. What are they called? Panelists. The people who, yeah, you know what I mean.
I understand COVID fog, but I don't understand the question you're asking.
opinion makers, okay. There are different opinions about what this means for the Democrats. They're, oh, this is going to save the Democrats, election. And then there are others who say, no, it doesn't matter. Well, do you have any opinion about what this means politically for the Democrats? I just ask because I am so angry at them that I would, I'm never taking you back, like you cheated on me so bad. It's like, a boyfriend. I'm never taking you back. I don't care what you do.
You're talking to the Democrats, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to say that WDI USA is a nonpartisan organization. We do not subscribe to any political party. So having said that, the conversations that I have on social media, I would say, are mostly about women Democrats or former Democrats who will never vote Democrat again because of what the Democratic Party has done to shred women's rights at the altar of gender identity. And this decision, the Dobbs decision to overturn Roe, will not affect that. What I'm seeing most Democrat women say is too late, too little, too late. They are so angry and they are saying, really? Now, you Democratic Party, you're going to use the fact that this regressive Supreme Court has rolled back abortion rights to ask again for my vote, again for my money? I've been supporting you for decades. You could have codified Roe at any point in the last 50 years. Am I mad that the Supreme Court took away my abortion rights? Yes. Are you going to get my vote? Absolutely not. That's the tenor of what I'm seeing on social media. Now, I don't know, that's not a representative sample or anything, but that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, good. I shouldn't say it, but.
Lorraine is saying she's seeing that as well. Does anyone have any questions, other questions for Iris or for Lauren? Lauren's saying yes. Oh, there's a question. Okay, I'll read the question. Lauren mentioned that one of the keys to success for the women's liberation movement involved women having a chance to meet in female-only spaces, which are now under threat. I'm a younger woman who wants to join with other local women in real life on a regular basis for consciousness-raising purposes, but the nearby women I know are always so exhausted from working or have boyfriends or husbands who essentially keep them at home that it seems impossible to organize. How did consciousness raising come about before?
It came about, well, I didn't get involved in it until the early 1970s, so I can't tell you how it occurred, in the late 60s when it originated. But so by the time I got involved, it was already a very attractive thing to do because we had seen the results of it. We saw political action, effective political action, coming out of consciousness raising. And we saw writing coming out of consciousness raising groups, and it was how you kept your finger on the pulse of the culture was to go to one of these things, and also you made amazing community, you made amazing friends, and you made amazing community. So it was totally attractive. I would suggest. My suggestions are really no better than anybody else's because I didn't experience the problem that you're experiencing, but I would try a potluck. Everybody loves potlucks. Um, Radical feminist food is the best. It's the best cuisine, you know what I mean? And I would try that as a lure. And even if you don't have quite enough people to begin with, do it anyway, because if you stick to the process, people will get excited about it. There will be, people will get a sense of euphoria from it, really, and word will get out. Good luck with it. I'm so glad you want to do that. I think it's,
Yes.
I think it's a fantastic idea.
Good luck with it. I live in a small town in Minnesota, and I've lost all my friends because my friends were all Democrats, and yeah, basically lost all my friends. I don't get invited anywhere anymore. It's amazing. Friends of 15, 20 years. It's sad.
Just on a slightly positive note, Dana wants us to make a meme of Lauren saying radical feminist food is the best cuisine. And I'm wondering if someone with graphic design ability can make that meme. I think that would be lovely. If there are more questions, please put them in the Q&A. In the meantime, we need to start getting really serious about advocacy and what are we going to do? And by we, I don't mean WDI USA exclusively. I mean women who care about women's lives. I've had the question, what can women do in the wake of the ruling? And one thing is we need to be doing exactly what Sarah Weddington and her friends did in Texas in the late 1960s. We need to be raising money and we need to be organizing so that we can be available as a resource for women who need to obtain abortions. There are going to be women of means who live in restrictive states who will be able to travel out of state to get an abortion. But poor women, as Lauren described, will not be able to travel or, you know, take off work from their jobs or leave their children or whatever the circumstances. And so it would be really good to have some funding in place. And this is going to be a really grassroots effort to create funding and resources for women who need to be able to access safe and legal abortions. You know, we're really in a bind. We radical feminists, we're really in a bind when it comes to electoral politics for the reasons that Iris has been talking about, because probably most of us really want to elect people who are going to secure abortion rights for women and girls. And also we are aware that those same people who say they will protect abortion rights for women and girls are also going to erase the material reality of sex throughout state law. So we're in a really tough position when it comes to figuring out who to vote for. I am not interested in telling any woman who to vote for. We are in an excruciating place of voting for gender, or not voting. Does everyone know what I mean by that? We have the left-wing version of gender and the right-wing version of gender, and not voting, pretending like or acting as though women didn't die so that we can vote, which of course they did in the early 20th century. Women died so that we can vote, and now many of us feel that we are caught, such that we don't want to vote for gender on the left, we don't want to vote for gender on the right, and so we won't vote. It's an excruciating position to be in.
We have to vote.
It's just so difficult to organize because women who women in what used to be my group who would have supported abortions are also Democrat who think I'm a Nazi, you know, and a bigot and transphobe and all that. So they would never organize with me. I can't. With whom am I going to organize? I mean, nobody wants to talk to me.
I understand. I mean, I don't know exactly where you live in Minnesota, Iris, but I understand the difficulty. I also think that there is a groundswell of women who are with us on abortion and also with us on gender identity. And we're just going to have to find those women. It's not easy. It's a few minutes before the end of the hour and Lauren's telling us all to vote. I mean, I don't know. It's just tough. It's just really tough. But I will say this, I will end on this note. I have this woman that I grew up with, and her name is Sarah. And I was never particularly close friends with Sarah, but we were friendly enough. And we're Facebook friends and have been for decades, although I didn't know that because she's not frequently on Facebook. So I just kind of haven't thought of her very much in the last couple of decades. The last time I saw Sarah in person was at our 20th high school reunion, which would have been in 2010. And we chatted and it was perfectly friendly. And Sarah reached out to me on Facebook Messenger several months ago. And she said, Kara, WTF is going on? She said, I'm a moderate Democrat. My husband's a moderate Republican. We mostly don't talk politics in our household. We've got 3 kids. They're all in high school, some of them heading into college. And I'm a pro-choice Democrat, and I do not understand what on earth the Democratic Party is doing here. I know that you've been talking about these things. Can you help me understand? So I wrote her back and I was like, Sarah, so nice to hear from you. Oh, there's one woman in the chat whose name is Amy. Amy, you may have met Sarah. Sarah and I went to school together in Athens. Amy knows what I'm talking about. No one else does. That's okay. So Sarah and I had a phone call. Sarah lives in Philadelphia, and we talked for hours. I hadn't spoken to this woman since 2010, and we talked for hours. And she is a pro-abortion Democrat woman who is with us and was confused and needed a little help understanding WTF is going on. And I was able to explain it to her. And now she is so grateful for all the work that those of us who are fighting so hard for the rights, privacy, and safety of women and girls are doing. So I don't want us to lose hope in the women in our lives who are with us for abortion rights, who are with us for women's sex-based rights as opposed to gender identity. We are out there. There are so many of us. We just have to find us. We're all over the place. Please don't give up. Iris or Lauren, do you want to say anything lastly before we end?
Yeah, I think it's really important to meet the people in your community and act together. There are so many ways to act, and potlucks, I'll say it again.
Radical feminist food is the best cuisine. Lauren said it first. Iris, do you want to say anything else in closing? We'd love to hear from you.
Well, I love to cook also, so I vote for that too. May I ask you, Lauren? You don't have to say, of course. I'm in Northfield, Minnesota. There are 2 colleges here in town, so it's a very liberal town. If someone lives close to me, I would love to get in touch with someone so I can. So I don't feel so alone here. I go alone to the school board meetings, and it would be just so nice to have just one other person. So I'm putting it out there.
Okay, that's great, Iris. There are women in Minnesota. Minnesota is a big state, of course, but there are women who are not far from you in Chicago, in Madison, Wisconsin. There are regional women who will support you. I don't know if they can show up with you to school board meetings, but,
No.
but there are women in your area who stand firmly with you, and some of them are in the chat right now. So we'll see.
It's just, I was involved in politics in Iceland. I've been involved, and I've supported, Democrats here, of course. This is the thing you get. And I've never experienced this this being completely on my own. So, yeah.
I think women hear you, Iris. I hear you. I know Lauren hears you. I know the women in the chat have heard you. I want you to know that you're not alone. We have to go for tonight. I want to thank everyone for coming. to the third installment of Living the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. I have so enjoyed hearing from Lauren and from Iris. Thank you both so much for sharing your histories and your stories and your voices and sharing it all. Every little bit helps. And we're going to keep going, women. We're not going to stop fighting for the sex-based rights of women and girls. Thank you, everyone who was here tonight.
Thank you.